Hello everyone, welcome to week 5's webinar. Most of you hopefully would have seen the poll that I put on a couple of days ago. It was Charlie's birthday yesterday and I wanted to take him out for dinner, and most of you voted to have a pre-recorded webinar this week, so here it is. We're going to be talking this week about barriers to progress such as menstrual cycles, PCOS, the menopause, different conditions, I'd say that for want of a better word, that can affect us throughout the month or in our period of life that we're in. So I'm going to be going through those. However, it's slightly different, and this is going to be a little bit of editing work from me. So you're seeing me now, I'm recording this today, this bit. But about a year ago, we held a webinar that was all to do with the menstrual cycle. It touched on a bit about contraception. It talked about pregnancy and PCOS. Sorry if I've just repeated myself there. And I thought that webinar was really good, and all I am going to do is repeat everything that I've said on there. So we've got the recording of that. So what's going to happen in a minute is I'm going to cut to that bit of the webinar, and you can watch through 20 minutes of that, I think it was. And then there's just some other bits that I want to add in that I'm going to record now that I didn't touch on in that webinar. And then what I'm going to do is talk about next week, because next week's the final week and something slightly different is going to happen. So I just want to talk you through that at the end. So enjoy listening to me a year ago on a webinar. And then after that, I will cut to just talking about I'm going to talk about contraception because I didn't really go through it too much on that one. I'm going to talk about the menopause because I didn't talk about it too much last year at all. And then sleep as well. So see you in 20 minutes. Okay, so hopefully that presentation was insightful. Now just a couple of bits that I want to go through that weren't included. The first is sleep. So obviously talking about barriers to progress, the menstrual cycle, the barrier to that is obviously when we're leading up to our period and how it can make us feel and things like that. Another barrier to progress is lack of sleep. Some people have really poor sleep, and then some people sleep really well. And it's something that when you don't sleep well, you really know about it, or when you do sleep well, you take for granted. Poor sleep can affect your physique and your body composition for a couple of reasons. One is when we are asleep, that's essentially when we are kind of achieving a state of homeostasis where everything starts to balance again. And one of those things is something called ghrelin and leptin, and they're hormones in our body that can influence hunger. Sorry, Charlie put me off because he waltzed in to get his lunch. Talking about hunger. They can impact our hunger and kind of our hunger cues. So if those hormones are out of balance, it can really throw off our appetite, e.g. make us more hungry or make us not so hungry. So sleep is that time when everything balances out. The next thing is cortisol. So cortisol is a hormone, and you often hear people refer to it as the stress hormone. If your cortisol levels are really high, as I've touched on in previous webinars, it can impact fat storage and things like that. So when you're not getting enough sleep, it can peak cortisol. Yeah. And then also just general energy and fatigue levels. If you're not sleeping, you're going to be more tired, which means you're not going to be up for your exercise as much, which means you're going to want to be more sedentary. And then being more sedentary impacts your calorie deficit, blah, blah, blah. So when we look at sleep, if you have, I'm not going to touch on if you have good sleep because that's great. If you have poor sleep, you need to look at whether you're struggling to drop off or whether you're struggling to stay asleep. Two different things here. Then we kind of need to dig deeper into, okay, but why are those things happening? So if you're struggling to drop off, is it because your sleep cycle is a bit messed up because you might sit on your phone too long and then suddenly your body's kind of sleeping rhythm is thinking that you should be going to bed at midnight because you've sat on your phone? If that's the case, lights out on your phone an hour before you need to go to bed. Do some work on recorrecting that routine. It could be because you're stressed and your brain isn't switching off. So sometimes we struggle to fall asleep because you're just thinking about everything. That's where you need to address the root problem. So if you've got something going on in your life, it's addressing that. Things like mindfulness, meditation, maybe falling asleep to some background noise, because if you're focusing on that, you're then kind of stopping the internal thoughts. But then if you're struggling to stay asleep, is it because are you getting up for a wee? So pregnancy has actually shown me how annoying that is, and once you've had babies and once you get older, your pelvic floor gets weaker or is a bit compromised, so you might be having to get up in the night for a wee. Fortunately, there's not too many ways around that, but if you are drinking loads of water before bed, that might contribute to how many times you need to get up in the night. So maybe try and get your water intake a bit earlier in the day so that you're not having loads of water before bed, to stop you needing to get up. Just circling back to not being able to drop off. Also look at caffeine intake. So we recommend no caffeine past 2 p.m. and not too much caffeine in the day generally. Staying asleep, again, could be a routine thing. So do you wake up at 4 a.m, think, oh, I'm awake now, and go straight on your phone? Try to train that routine out of yourself. If you do wake up at 4 a.m, think, no, I'm going to go back to sleep. And if you can't go back to sleep, sit there with your eyes closed, because your brain will start to think, no, this is sleep time. The environment that you're sleeping in, is it too hot? Is it too cold? Obviously children really influence this, and I have no advice for that. So if your sleep is impacted by children, soz. But that just shows the importance of sleep. And if you are struggling with sleep quality, supplements like melatonin and also magnesium can really help. To do your research on those is something that we look into with our one-to-one clients as well. So that's that. Next thing is the menopause. So the menopause is essentially when a biological woman's body shifts to not be fertile anymore. So the whole point, as you would have seen, of a menstrual cycle is biologically for a woman to get pregnant. You ovulate, the egg sits in your womb, ready to meet sperm. If it doesn't meet a sperm, the egg dies, and then your uterus lining sheds because it got nice and thick, ready to support a pregnancy. And if it didn't support a pregnancy that month, it will then shred, ready for your next attempt next month. When you hit the menopause, you stop ovulating. So if you stop ovulating, you're obviously not getting a period because it's not triggering a period, and that's why your periods stop in the menopause. And as I'd explained before, estrogen and progesterone are the main hormones that impact that ovulation. Now, estrogen drops massively in the menopause, and that's why ovulation stops. But that is also why women can put on weight a lot more easily in the menopause, because estrogen drops. And estrogen has so many different benefits in terms of blood sugar control, also cortisol control, but also our muscle mass. So muscle mass decreases with age. And we know that muscle burns more energy at rest. So if you've got a bigger muscle mass percentage, e.g. men, you're going to burn more calories at rest. So the fact that that decreases with age means that that's why our metabolic rate decreases with age. But in line with estrogen dropping as well, that can also impact your muscle mass. If you go and Google the benefits of estrogen, it's wild. And there's nothing that we can necessarily do to combat that other than things like your healthy diet, still continuing to exercise and engage in weight training to combat the degeneration over the years. And then also you've got HRT and which is hormone replacement therapy, where you can get estrogen patches and things like that to try and boost your estrogen levels synthetically. So that's why the menopause can be tricky, but it is unfortunately one of those things that will happen to every woman, and we can't really control other than keeping up training, considering hormone replacement therapy, eating a really good balanced diet as well. So that's the menopause. The next, I didn't write it here, but contraception. So I touched on it briefly with in that PowerPoint. But the whole point of contraception, let me put this on the screen so that people know what I'm talking about now. So the whole point of contraception is to stop us from getting pregnant. And majority of contraceptions out there, all bar the copper coil, do that by giving us synthetic hormones to pretty much stop the natural process of ovulation, because if you don't release an egg, you are not going to, there's nothing kind of there to fertilize, and the bleed that you have is just the withdrawal from the drugs if you are on the pill where you have a break. If you're on the continuous pill, you won't really get that. So the reason contraception can impact scale weight is because your hormones are now flatlining. So you know, in that graph in that webinar where we have peaks and troughs of different hormones which trigger ovulation or trigger the maturing of the eggs and things like that, spiking, peaking and troughing. When you are on hormonal contraception, they are just kind of flatline throughout the month. Because estrogen has benefits like blood sugar regulation, but also like it can impact water retention and things, you will probably have those side effects potentially all throughout your cycle. So when we are on a natural cycle and you have the side effects like craving more sugar or feeling bloated when you're due on your period, that's because of the hormone profile at that certain time of the month. That hormone cycle, that hormone profile is pretty much how someone will feel all the time when they take hormonal contraception. But that doesn't mean hormonal contraception is negative, because you are taking it because you don't want to get pregnant. So the benefits outweigh any kind of minor side effects that you might feel there. So don't immediately go and come off the pill and tell your doctor, Freya said this, and all of you end up bloody pregnant. But it's just one of the kind of slight side effects of being on contraception, because you don't have that natural peaks and troughs of hormones. The copper coil is different, and I've actually had the copper coil twice because I would prefer to have my natural cycle. The copper coil is like a little device that's implanted into your uterus that then the copper ions, when sperm meets those copper ions in your womb, it dies. So it dies before it meets the egg and it can't get fertilized, essentially. It also makes the mucus in your that lines your cervix too thick for the sperm to swim through, or it makes it harder, so it kind of can't get to the egg. The benefits of that is that it's you still have your natural cycle, so you still ovulate as normal, you'll still have your natural cycle, but obviously it can be slightly painful and cause heavier periods, and then when you obviously get it taken out, you're fertile. So that's contraception. I'm now just going to go through a couple of the Q&A questions, and then I want to talk about what's going to happen next week. Okay, so first question is how to deal with increased appetite and sweet cravings when due on. So that's all to do with the hormone profile before your period, and if I'm honest, it's about tactics rather than trying to suppress that that feeling. So we're always going to get that. You are always going to get usually the increase in the appetite and the sweet cravings. It's more so about how you control it. So obviously eating a high protein diet keeps you fuller for longer. Hopefully most of you will realise that. So you have to make sure that you are getting your protein intake in before you head for any sweet treats. It's then about, if you like, want a sweet treat, choosing some better options. And a couple of people, because it has come up in their check-ins, we sent this like list of really good like sweet treats to have. So I'll link that when I post this webinar for you all to refer to. So it's about going, okay, I'm going to have these sugar cravings, but having a better choice of it. My favourite tactic is you're going to get an increase in appetite. And sometimes you've just got to eat more calories. But what you have to remember is a controlled increase in calories is better than an uncontrolled increase in calories. And what I mean by that is it's so easy to go, do you know what? Fuck it. I'm on my period. I'm due on my period. I deserve this. And then suddenly you've like skipped dinner and then you've gone for like loads and like just raided the cupboard full of snacks, and before you know it, you're 1,000 calories into crisps, bloody cheese, sweet chocolate, etc., etc. Whereas, and that's just meaningless, pointless calories. Whereas the best thing that you can do is say, okay, I'm actually going to eat at maintenance for the day. So I'm going to give myself a controlled increase of 500 calories, but I'm going to have more food at dinner time. So I'm going to have more potato, or I'm going to have more pasta, or I'm going to have more veg and more protein, because they're meaningful calories. I know that I'm hungry, I want to eat more, but I don't want to go over by 1,000 calories. I'll go over by 500 of meaningful calories, and just increase your calories for the day. You're not going to put yourself out of your deficit for your week. You're just going to put yourself out of your deficit for a day. But what you're going to avoid doing is going into a surplus by controlling it more. So that's my tactics. So the next one is, you wanted me to talk about if hormonal contraception can impact weight loss. So hopefully your question's kind of been answered during that. I don't necessarily think it impacts the deficit that you achieve, other than the temptation to snack more, the increased potential side effects causing an increase in appetite. It won't stop you from losing weight. Definitely not. You might just feel slightly more hungry than if you weren't on hormonal contraception. But some people won't feel side effects at all. And if you're sitting here like, I've been on the pill since I was 16 and I'm fine, crack on, like, good. That's fine. Dealing with night sweats when in a deficit, if I'm honest, it's completely unrelated, I think. So I wouldn't say that the deficit is causing the night sweats. That might be more hormonal. So unfortunately, I can't help you on that one, because that's kind of more medical than I think it is related to a deficit. And night sweats are a symptom of some perimenopausal change. Could you be going through that? I don't know. Any tips to do when you're due on like more water? So again, you are not going to stop yourself feeling bloated before your period. It's the hormone profile at that point just makes us retain more water. You are not going to stop that. But what you can stop is any bloating that is due from dehydration. So essentially it's the same. Stick to your deficit calories, like if you can. Drink lots of water and just accept that this is just the stage of my menstrual cycle that I'm on right now. Have I done everything to limit water retention from a lifestyle point of view? Let me just go to the next screenshot. Okay, I keep seeing how things should be done differently during the perimenopause and menopause. Is this true, or is it the same rules for every age as we are doing now? So strength and calorie deficit. Yes, so the principle of a calorie deficit is the same whether you are man, woman, alien, perimenopausal, prepubescent, a baby, whatever. The only way to lose fat is to be eating less calories than what you're burning. Now, the difference with the perimenopause and being in the menopause is that because your estrogen production and response is lower, it can make it harder to break down carbohydrates. And if we don't break down carbohydrates very effectively, it can cause unwanted fat storage. And that's why some people in the menopause notice like a rubber ring around their belly when they may not have had that when they were in their 20s or 30s. That's not the same for everyone though. So the time that you would do something different is if after sort of 8 to 10 to 12 weeks of being in a deficit and being in a true deficit, nothing is changing, we then may consider things like, okay, do we need to adopt a slightly lower carb intake and focus on fats? Is there any like conversations that need to happen with the doctor? So I guess the short answer for this is no, nothing needs to change. You may need to dip your calories lower than someone who is in their 20s or 30s, or someone who is not menopausal. But the only thing that might change is your carbohydrate percentage. But again, you would only do that if you're not getting results after like 3 months. Is it normal to feel weak just before your period, as this is what I have been this week? So normal. So normal. My belly has been bloated, feel frumpy, scales have gone up. Again, scales have gone up just because you're retaining more water, and that's evident from the bloating. All fine as part of the cycle, but adding weakness to it as well, is that normal? Yeah. And that's when you have to look at your expectations of yourself. And some people get like really extreme PMS. Some people get something called PMDD. And I just remember before my period, because obviously I've not had a period now for 7 months, training was horrible. And so you have to almost look at like when you're on your period, or when you just finish your period rather, and when you're ovulating and you feel strong, really make the most of that. And then if you're genuinely feeling just too weak for a strength session, maybe say, okay, over the next couple of days whilst I'm feeling really PMSy, I'm just going to focus on steps and like low intensity stuff. But also remember that going to the gym and doing some strength training, you're never going to regret it. And your baseline strength and failure level might be lower, but you're still hitting failure and you're still doing it. So it's so normal. So they were the questions for this week. Again, any questions that have cropped up off the back of this, you can just put it in the comments below or message the group chat. Now, next week is the last. Anyone who is like a current client at Potentia on one-to-one, you don't need to listen to this because it's not relevant. But anyone on the Lean In 6 challenge, it's the last week next week. So I'm obviously going to be doing the webinar on Wednesday, which will be talking about what happens next. Your last check-ins next week will also be about what's your plan, like what happens next. So that will be covered, okay? However, next week we are, well, as of Sunday, so the Sunday coming in like 3 days' time, we are opening up two-way messaging on the app. So you will have probably noticed that we can message you on the app, but you can't message us. And that's because our one-to-one clients message us on WhatsApp freely. Obviously, this was a challenge and a drop down from our one-to-one, so it's not fair for to give that one-to-one support when there's people that are on it anyway. But some of you might be sitting there thinking, I'm really interested in the one-to-one coaching, I've got results. So we're opening up the two-way messaging to be able to talk to you about upgrades. Now, I just want to caveat this by saying it doesn't mean that you can fire away like coaching questions. They still need to go in the group chat. But if you've got any questions about upgrading, please use the two-way messaging thing that will be opened on Sunday to talk to us about upgrading. I'm also going to be opening up call slots on Wednesday or Thursday next week, where you can jump on and we can get on a Zoom call and talk about what the one-to-one coaching is, and you can ask me loads of questions. I'll show you an insight into what it is, and we can go for there if you're keen to join it. And obviously your Lean In 6 will go towards the one-to-one coaching. So look out for those slots and book in a time if you're really keen. Please don't book in a call and then not show up, because that is just a waste of my time. But if you're really if you're interested and genuinely want to know more, get a slot booked in on Sunday for the following week. That's all. Hope that was probably quite a long webinar by the time I've put this all together, but a good one. So any questions, pop them in the thing below, and I hope to speak to many of you next week about one-to-one. Thank you.